I want to start today with a question. When you think about best practices for LinkedIn, the things you've been told work, the habits you've built up, the advice you've absorbed from LinkedIn gurus and marketing teams and well-meaning colleagues, how much of it is actually based on data from people like you? Not influencers, not content creators, not people whose full-time job is posting, not coaches who built their following by teaching others to build followings. Executives, CEOs, senior leaders, people running real organizations with real stakeholders in real industries, for whom LinkedIn visibility is one of dozens of demands on their time, not their primary one. Because here's what I found after 4 years of studying this. A lot of the advice that gets handed to executives was designed for someone else entirely. And when you apply influencer logic to executive LinkedIn, you get influencer results, which are the wrong results. High reach, wrong audience. Broad appeal, zero precision. Lots of likes from people who will never buy from you, hire you, or invest in you. This year, we published our 4th annual Executive LinkedIn Report. 6,035 posts, 33 million impressions, 457,000 engagements from CEOs, C-suite leaders, and senior executives across healthcare, software, financial services, education, and more. And what the data shows, in several cases, directly contradicts the conventional wisdom. Today, I'm going to walk you through what we found, the things that work, the things that don't, myths that the data has now killed definitively, and what it all means for how you should be thinking about your presence on LinkedIn in 2026. This is Cultivating Executive Presence. I'm Justin Asiri, and this is episode 11, What the Data Actually Says. Welcome to Cultivating Executive Presence, a podcast for leaders who must lead in public. I'm Justin Asiri, CEO of Executive Presence, and your guide to stepping into the visibility your company needs, even when it's the last thing you want to do. Every week, we'll explore the strategies, frameworks, and mindset shifts that help leaders build influence without losing integrity. From finding what to say to making peace with being seen, this is where reluctant leaders learn to lead out loud. So take a deep breath and let's get started. Before I get into the findings, I want to spend a minute on why this report exists and what makes it different from everything else out there. There is no shortage of LinkedIn research. LinkedIn publishes data. Marketing firms publish data. Influencers publish playbooks. There are entire cottage industries built around teaching people how to grow on LinkedIn. The problem is almost all of it is based on the wrong population. Most LinkedIn research draws from content creators, marketers, and professional social media users, people who frequently post because posting is their job. When you study that population, you learn what works for that population. And what works for someone whose primary identity is LinkedIn creator is often actively wrong for a CEO or senior leader. Here's the clearest example. One of the most consistent findings in general LinkedIn research is that broad, universally appealing topics perform best. Productivity, motivation, work-life balance, mindset. Those topics get massive reach because everyone can relate to them. And that's exactly the problem for executives. You don't want massive reach from everyone. You want precise reach from the right people. An investor, a potential enterprise buyer, a key hire. Those people don't follow you because they want productivity tips. They follow you because of your specific domain expertise, your niche, the particular industry or problem you understand better than almost anyone. The advice to go broad is the right advice for an influencer and exactly the wrong advice for a CEO. So 4 years ago, we started tracking our own data, not because we wanted to publish a report, although we do now, but because we needed to understand what actually works for the people we serve. Real leaders running real organizations for whom LinkedIn is a leadership tool, not a content strategy. This year's data set is the largest and most rigorous we've built, and I want to share what we found. Let me start with the good news, because there's a lot of anxiety among executives right now about whether LinkedIn still works, whether the algorithm has gotten harder, whether the organic reach is declining. The data is clear on this. For executives who have been showing up consistently, the returns are improving. When we compare Q1 of 2025 to Q1 of 2026, the average executive post now reaches 14% more people than it did a year ago. The executives who built the habit of posting consistently through 2025 are now getting better results than at any point in their LinkedIn tenure. This doesn't mean the platform has gotten easier. In fact, it's gotten noisier. AI tools have lowered the barrier to content creation, which means more posts competing for the same attention. Organic reach has declined materially compared to even 4 months ago. LinkedIn is following Facebook's playbook from 2011, gradually shifting toward a pay-to-play model where paid promotion is increasingly necessary to cut through the noise. But here's what the data also shows. The executives who invested in building a genuine presence, real content, real voice, real consistency, before the noise got this loud are now in the best position they've ever been in. Their audience is larger. Their algorithmic signal is stronger. Every post they publish benefits from the compounding of everything that came before it. The window hasn't closed, but it is narrowing. And the executives who start now will need to do more work to get where the early movers already are. That's the context. Now let me get into what the data says actually works. The first question most executives ask about LinkedIn is a format question. Should I post text, images, video? What actually moves the needle? Here's what our data from 6,035 posts shows. Images generate the highest average impressions at 7,031 impressions per post, 31% more than text-only posts. If you want reach, adding a relevant image is the single easiest lever you can pull. Not a stock photo with inspirational text overlaid on it. That's the influencer playbook, not the executive playbook. A real photo, something from your life or your work that connects to what you're saying. A chart if you're making a data-driven point. Something visual that belongs in the post rather than being attached to it. Video is the engagement leader, but the engagement rate leader at 3% average. Video is also the hardest format to produce consistently, which is why I don't lead with it in most conversations. But if you have the infrastructure to do it, video earns the deepest connection of any format. People who watch your video feel like they know you in a way that reading your post doesn't quite achieve. Text punches above its weight. The average text post delivers 5,379 impressions, below images but still substantial. And here's what's interesting. The highest performing individual posts in our data set were almost entirely text. 11 of the top 15 posts by impressions were text only. So text underperforms on average, but overperforms at the extreme end. When a text post really lands, it lands harder than almost anything else. What underperforms consistently for the second year running is documents, also known as carousels. Those are those things that you swipe on that are kind of like a slideshow in LinkedIn. The algorithm and the audience have moved on. What LinkedIn called documents, those multi-slide PDFs that were popular a few years ago, have been declining in performance for 2 years straight, and it's been defaulting to carousels. If you've been defaulting to carousels, stop. The data doesn't support it. One more finding on format that I want to flag. Original posts reach 5 times more people than reshares. 5 times. The average original post in our data set gets 5,959 impressions. The average reshare gets 1,192. I want to dwell on this a moment because I think it's one of the most practically important findings in the whole report. Resharing someone else's content feels productive. It feels like you're adding value, staying relevant, engaging with what's happening in your industry, and it takes almost no effort. But it reaches essentially nobody. And here's why that matters beyond numbers. When you reshare, you're ceding your authority to whoever wrote the original piece. You're saying, this person's thinking matters, instead of, here's my thinking. You're doing content curation instead of thought leadership. And the audience can feel the difference, which is why they engage dramatically less. If you're going to post, make it yours. A few sentences of genuine perspective will outperform any reshare you'll ever publish. Okay, so format matters, but what should you actually say? We analyzed 6,035 posts across 4 content categories, and the hierarchy is clear and consistent. Personal stories perform best. Posts rooted in lived experience, a family moment, a career inflection point, a genuine admission about something you got wrong, averaged 6,907 impressions at a 2.14% engagement rate, the highest of any category. Leadership and career content comes second at 5,414 impressions and a 2.02% engagement rate. Lessons learned, management decisions, thoughts on hiring and culture, the terrain executives are uniquely qualified to speak on. Industry insight is third at 5,094 impressions and a 2.08% engagement rate. Market observations, trend commentary, predictions. Still strong, especially when the executive takes an original position rather than summarizing what everyone already knows. And company and promotion content comes last at 4,152 impressions. Product announcements, company milestones, funding news. These posts underperform not because they're wrong to share, they're legitimate and important, but because impersonal promotional content doesn't connect the way personal content does. And this is fixable. Company wins shared through the leader's personal lens. Here's what that milestone means to me. Here's the moment I realized we'd actually built something. Performed far better than the announcement style post. The pattern here is consistent with what I've said in previous episodes. Audiences engage with people, not positions. The executives who are breaking through on LinkedIn aren't writing industry summaries. They're sharing the decision they've wrestled with and the moments that shaped how they lead. I want to be honest about why this is hard for executives specifically. The instinct for most senior leaders is to lead with expertise, not experience, to present conclusions, not process, to project confidence, not vulnerability. That's often the right instinct in a board meeting or a client presentation. LinkedIn is different. The platform rewards the human layer, not because your audience doesn't care about your expertise, they absolutely do, but because expertise without humanity is just information, and information is everywhere. What your audience can't get anywhere else is your specific, particular experience of building something, leading something, failing at something, learning from it. That's the asset, and the data confirms it every year. I want to spend some time here on two findings that I think are genuinely important, not just because they're interesting, but because they contradict advice that has been repeated so often it has become received wisdom. The first myth, hashtags help your content reach more people. I have heard this for years. Add hashtags, use the right hashtags, research which hashtags your audience follows, build hashtag strategies. It's repeated constantly in LinkedIn advice. Our data says the opposite now for 2 years running. Posts without hashtags average 5,732 impressions. Posts with hashtags average 4,350 impressions. That is a 32% reach penalty for using hashtags. Meanwhile, the engagement rate is essentially identical between the two groups. 2.07% versus 2.06%, statistically indistinguishable. Let me be precise about what this data shows. Hashtags do not add engagement, and they actively cost reach. The conclusion is unambiguous. LinkedIn's algorithm today prioritizes content that earns fast engagement in the first hour. Hashtags don't accelerate that. And there's an argument that they signal algorithmic optimization, that you're playing a reach game rather than writing genuinely compelling content, which may actually suppress distribution. I want to flag this especially for anyone working with a marketing team that has built a hashtag strategy for your LinkedIn. That strategy is not helping you. It may be hurting. The executive writing the most compelling content in our dataset are not stopping to append tags. They write, they publish, they do not tag. The second myth, ending post with a question drives more comments. This one is repeated constantly. Always end with a question. Invite your audience to engage. Ask for the response you want. It sounds logical. If you want comments, ask for a response. Our data. Posts ending with a question average 6.4 comments. Posts without a question average 6.8 comments. Questions do not increase comments. They do carry a reach penalty. Posts with closing questions average 5,306 impressions versus 5,520 for posts without them, a 4% difference. What actually drives comments is a provocative position or a relatable story. The invitation to respond doesn't need to be explicit. It needs to be earned. When someone reads your post and genuinely has a reaction, agreement, disagreement, recognition, they comment. When someone reads your post and sees, "What do you think?" at the bottom, they don't comment. The question feels like a prompt, and prompts feel like homework. Write a post that makes someone want to respond. Don't ask them to. Stop adding questions as a tactic. If a question fits naturally and genuinely, use it. If you're appending it because you were told it helps, the data says it doesn't, and it's costing you reach. Let me cover two more tactical findings that I think are genuinely useful. The first is about timing, and specifically about a day that almost nobody uses and that outperforms every other day in our data set, Sunday. Of 6,035 posts analyzed, 80 were published on Sunday. That's only 1.3% of the total. And yet Sunday posts averaged 9,569 impressions, the highest of any day. Sunday's engagement rate was also the highest at 2.13%. For comparison, Monday, the most instinctive posting day, the day most people think of as the beginning of the professional week, averaged only 5,080 impressions. Sunday outperformed Monday by 88%. Why? The most likely explanation is competition. Almost no executive posts on Sunday, which means almost no one is competing for attention on Sunday. And the professionals who check LinkedIn on Sunday are in a different headspace, more reflective, less reactive, more willing to engage with something substantive. I'm not saying post only on Sunday. Any weekday is a solid window, but if you have a piece of content you believe in, a post you've put real thought into, it's worth considering Sunday as the publication day. The data suggests you'll reach significantly more people. The second is about length. We analyze performance by character count, and the findings are more nuanced than the conventional longer is better advice. Posts in the 1,500 to 3,000 character range produce the highest average impressions at 5,925. The 750 to 1,499 character range follows at 5,454. Both are solid windows. Here's the surprising finding. Very short posts, under 250 characters, average 5,762 impressions, nearly matching the top tier. The clear underperformer is the 250 to 749 character range at just 4,800. That's the awkward middle. Not short enough to land as a punchy observation, but not long enough to develop a real idea. The practical implication: commit to depth or commit to brevity. Write long when you have something genuinely worth exploring. Write short when you have something genuinely worth saying in a single, sharp observation. The middle ground underperforms because it's neither. One more note on length. Engagement rate holds steady all the way to 3,000 characters. There is no long post fatigue in our data. When executives write something worth reading, people read it. The fear that longer posts will lose the audience isn't supported by what we're seeing. I want to spend some time on what I think is one of the most significant findings in the report because it has implications beyond tactics. We identified 7 executives in our data set who average 15 or more posts per month. I call them power posters. That is a high bar. 15 posts a month is nearly 4 posts a week sustained. Those 7 executives generated 47% of all impressions in our data set. Let that land. 7 executives, 13% of the group, nearly half of the 33 million impressions. They also averaged 7,957 impressions per post, noticeably higher than the dataset average. That means it's not just volume. The consistency itself is improving their per post performance, almost certainly because the algorithm rewards regular publishers and because their audience has grown through repeated exposure. Now, I want to address something directly here because I think this finding gets misread. The takeaway is not post 15 times a month. That's not the lesson. And honestly, if I told every executive I worked with to go from 1 post a month to 15, most of them would quit within 60 days. And rightfully so. 15 posts a month without a system is unsustainable. With a system, it's completely manageable. The real lesson from this finding is that consistency at this level doesn't happen by accident or by willpower. It happens through infrastructure. These power posters are not grinding out content on nights and weekends. They have a process for capturing ideas, a process for turning those ideas into posts efficiently, and a process for reviewing and publishing consistently. In the work we do with clients, the mechanism is a monthly interview, 30 to 60 minutes, where an engagement manager pulls out their thinking, their stories, their perspective through the right questions. And a writer and editor turn that into a month of content. The executive reviews, approves, and posts. The total time investment is 1 to 2 hours a month. That's how you get to 15 posts a month without it consuming your calendar. Content doesn't come from sitting down to write. It comes from talking about what you already know, already think, already believe, and having a team that knows how to capture it and shape it. The executives generating the most reach aren't more talented writers. They've built a repeatable process for showing up. That's what separates the 47% from the rest. I want to close with something that I think is the most important context for all of this data. We are all now well over a year into large language models being in the mass market. In that time, we've watched companies try to automate their executives' LinkedIn content, use AI to generate posts, scale output without requiring the executive's time. And we've watched many of them come back. The consistent feedback is AI-generated content sounds like AI. There's a texture to it that people can feel when they can't name it. The voice is smooth, but not specific. The insights are reasonable, but not earned. The stories are plausible, but not real. And on LinkedIn, where authenticity is the entire point, content that sounds like AI does exactly the opposite of what you need it to do. At the same time, AI is flooding LinkedIn with noise. The volume of content on the platform has increased significantly. The algorithm is struggling to surface what matters, and executives who have been posting generic, safe, smoothly written content are finding it increasingly hard to break through. Here's what the data shows is breaking through. Texts that take a genuine position, personal stories from lived experience, industry insight that could only have been written by someone who has actually been in the room, content that is specific enough to be credible and human enough to be compelling. The top 15 posts in our dataset tell this story clearly. 11 of them are text only. Every single one opens with a statement that creates tension or provocation in under 15 words, and none of them are playing it safe. Look at some of these opening lines. Quote, "Get rid of unlimited PTO. I regret my decision to implement unlimited PTO in the early days." Quote, "I fired my company's most important employee and I do it again." Quote, "I recently told a team member to leave the office." These aren't AI-generated observations. They are human decisions that took courage to make public. Decisions that invite genuine reaction, agreement, or disagreement. That's why they generate hundreds of thousands of impressions, not because they hacked the algorithm, because they made the reader feel something. Content explosion created by AI is real, but it's also creating a premium for authenticity. The leaders who invest in their genuine voice, whether they write it themselves or work with professionals like us who can capture it, will be the ones who stand out because everything around them is starting to sound the same. Let me bring this home. 4 years of data, over 6,000 posts, 33 million impressions. Here's what it tells us. Lead with images for reach, 31% more than text on average. But when a text post really lands, it lands harder than anything else, which is why 11 of the 15 highest performing posts in our dataset are text only. Make it original. Original posts reach 5 times more people than reshares. Your voice is the most powerful asset on this platform. Drop the hashtags. 32% reach penalty. 0 engagement benefit. The data has now said this 2 years in a row. It's time to accept it. Make it personal. Personal stories outperform every other content strategy, more than industry insight, more than leadership lessons, more than company news. Audiences engage with people, not positions. Stop ending posts with a question. It doesn't drive more comments. It costs you reach. If the post is compelling, the response will come. Try Sunday. 88% more impressions than Monday with the highest engagement rate of any day. And only 1.3 of the posts are published on Sunday, which means almost no competition. And build a system. The 7 executives generating 47% of all impressions in our data set are not working harder than everyone else. They've built a repeatable process that lets them show up consistently, week after week, month after month, without it consuming their calendar. Here's what I keep coming back to after 4 years of running this analysis. The executives who get the most from LinkedIn aren't the ones with the largest audiences or the most polished content. They're the ones who show up consistently, speak from genuine experience, and treat visibility as an act of service rather than an act of self promotion. They're not trying to go viral, they're trying to lead in public. In 2026, that distinction matters more than ever. The noise is louder than it's ever been. The algorithm is harder to crack than it's ever been. And for and the premium for genuine, human specific executives' voice is higher than it's ever been. The bar is rising, and so is the opportunity. Next episode, we're going to talk about what happens when a well established competitor is getting less attention than a newer, less credentialed one, and what to do about it. Because being the best in your market and being perceived as the best are two completely different things. I'm Justin Asiri. Thank you for listening. This is Cultivating Executive Presence.